just floated around the house. Oh my God.
Trap you in.
Story.
I want you to see, because it isn't on this agenda, and we kind of, I created you a little sheet, so we always go through that.
That works.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm gonna be on my desk and my staff.
Oh, well, we got
Yeah.
Great, how are you? Good.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
They just kind of walk in
They
there.
got it from a kilo.
There you go. I know after those onions I ate, I need.
Like if I hire you, I can
Face masks are good for that.
Yes. We're going to do 3 minutes on
I think. Where they can see it.
We'll put it right here. And you'll just hand it to me each time, so I don't mess up on it. And I'll just put it here when it's ready.
What time do you?
I have 4:59.
What's he said about
That's, that's our music teacher. Yeah. The students.
Oh, great. Got fine?
football. Son's football pictures tonight. 6:30. We should be on.
That's good. Thank you. Please rise and join me in a moment of silence. Tonight, we want to remember Carol Little, who passed away September 21st. Mrs. Little worked at Central and the Central family for approximately 25 years. So if you'll keep Mrs. Little in your thoughts for a moment of silence. Mr. Grimm, do we have anybody to lead us in the pledge, or? Hello, everybody.
Hello.
You want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I would love to.
That's what I thought.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. Call our roll. Dr. O'Neill.
Present.
Mr. Heater.
Present.
Mrs. Bales. Mrs. Barnes Griffin.
Present.
Mr. Irvin.
Present.
Mr. Lowe.
Present.
Okay, we'll show everybody present. We're on to the agenda. Mr. Graham.
Good evening, Mr. Williams, Board of Trustees, Dr. Kwiatkowski, and cabinet members. Thank you for having me here tonight to talk a little bit about Northside Middle School, tell you a little bit about where we're at right now and where we're going this year, and then I'll introduce, I always try to bring some of our students and even our staff members to give you a little taste of some stuff that's going on at Northside each year. So we'll get started here, and I'll start with just some general information. I'm sure you're aware a little bit of this, but when I did this presentation, we had 579 Students, were probably not too far off that. The other day we were 575. As you know, we get kids in and out quite frequently, but that is the largest in-person enrollment at Northside Middle School since 2016-17. So that's a really good thing. So we've got lots of kiddos in the building this year. Our typical enrollment, the first 3-4 years I've been at Northside, has been about 525 each year. So we've obviously grown that a little bit this year. We have 36 teachers, 12 support staffs, 1 student assistance coordinator, a couple counselors, and then myself and 2 assistant principals. We have some really strong general education programs, special education programs, and then we also house the gifted and talented program there in the middle school as well. We have anywhere from 12 to 15 clubs in our building going on at any certain period of time, and we have 9 different athletic teams, which their season comes to an end for fall sports next week. So, and then we'll, after fall break, start the winter round of sports. So that's just some information. This is our ILT. Through NIET, we have an instructional leadership team that's made up of the administrators. I have 2 of the best, probably, master teachers, I would say, in the district, in Lori Church and Joanne Norris. They are fantastic. I have 4 mentor teachers this year, so we're fully staffed with mentors. And they bring a variety of backgrounds from English to science and technology and math to music. So I've got a little bit of everything in there. So they have a well-rounded group that can represent all of our teachers and help all of our teachers. And then we've really enjoyed working with Melissa Blossom this year. I think she's been here at some point or will be here at some point and has talked to everyone. We really have enjoyed working with her. She's pretty much going to be a Muncie only person here very soon. I saw an email from her today saying that she had finishing up some of her other schools, and she'll be at Northside on Friday working with our master teachers this week. So there's our data. It's not the most outstanding data in the world. I will say our ELA data is decent compared to surrounding school districts, schools that are very comparable to us. We actually had about a 10% growth from the last iLearn test in our 8th grade iLearn scores. We were at 20-some%, and last year grew to 35%. So our ELA data is not great, but it's kind of holding steady. So we're looking to improve that, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Our math data is a little bit of a concern, and that's really where we're spending a lot of our time this year addressing. So those are some areas that we're working on, and I'll go into kind of what we're doing to address that. So we've got a pretty substantial goal. So if you just saw those numbers, we're really pushing our teachers a little bit this year. Typically in the past, we would say, let's try for a 5 or 10% increase in our scores. So we're shooting for 55%. So that's a 20% increase in English and even up to a 40% increase in math. So it makes teachers a little bit uncomfortable at times because we're saying 55, that's what we're shooting for. Don't know if we'll get there, but I think we may get higher than that normal 5 or 10% just because we're shooting so high. And that's kind of been the thought process of setting the goals that high, especially when we're working with NIET. So we have some specific goals that we do every week, which is quite different than we've ever done in a building that I've been a principal at. Typically, you would let teachers, you say, okay, our scores are this. Teachers, do what you do. You're the experts. Work at these skills and try to raise that. So we found that may not have been as successful. So we've set some very specific goals this year. So we're doing some very specific strategies every week, repeating them over and over with our kids to get some very targeted results to see if that works. We're not just simply leaving it up to the teachers to come up with that. So we have some number sense activities we do. We've got some problem solving activities we do every Friday. And we've got some informational text stuff that we're doing every week in our non-math classes throughout the building. So we're trying to make it very intentional this year. And that's definitely through help of Ball State. We sat down with Ball State over the summer and developed these goals. And then we've worked with NIET to carry them out throughout the year. So those are some things we're doing very specifically at Northside. So our plan with that is we have two great PDS liaisons that are in our building a lot. Dr. Susanna Benko was in today. She sat through our ILT meeting. She was in our English classes. Dr. Gatska's in our meetings. So that's been a great partnership. That will continue to get better as they start to do professional development, and they're really working individually with a lot of our teachers. I mentioned Melissa Blossom. And then you can see our building initiatives. Every week we're working on number sense problems, problem-solving activities in math classes. We have 2 initiatives there because our scores need a little bit more help in math. And then we have a building initiative and informational text each week. So this is the exciting part of our presentation. That was kind of the nuts and bolts things that we're doing every day academically. But I wanted to bring a group this year that really stands out in our building. You'll see that here tonight. So last year in January, Mr. Dennison came to me and said, "Hey, I want to start a club." So I'm like, "Okay, tell me what you want to do." "Well, I want to make a TV club. So I want a club that can do TV broadcasts. So I want to, teach kids how to do this. I think it would be very neat." So I said, "Sure." So I said, "I think there was this program at one point at Central or somewhere, Annie Pichardo had this equipment." So I called Dr. Reynolds and said, "Hey, do you still have that equipment?" He said, "Yes, I do." So one day on Mr. Denniston's prep, we came over and got this camera from Dr. Reynolds, and off he was going. And then from there, now he has his own classroom because we have an extra classroom for him. He's got cameras. We bought him a teleprompter. He's got a green screen. He's got kind of his own little studio there that he makes these broadcasts in every week. So he started a YouTube channel for these broadcasts. He does a tremendous job of promoting it. And this year, that club has grown to 80 students in its membership. So that's pretty impressive when you think about how many clubs and different things. It's by far the biggest group of any one group that we have. It's bigger than probably band, it's bigger than choir, it's bigger than drama, it's bigger than any of our athletic teams. It's by far our largest student group. It's so large that every week we do a broadcast, it's a different set of kids every week because he has so many kids to get in to make sure they're doing something. Every week they're doing something. So it's been a very positive thing. Mr. Dennison, through this hard work, I recognized him as our Northside Teacher of the Year last year. And then he went on to be the secondary Teacher of the Year. So he's a pretty phenomenal teacher in choir, but he also spends a lot of time with this technology and this TV group that he has each week, that's for sure. So they do live taping. There's some pictures of the set. They cover athletic events and report out on these to the students. So it's definitely becoming a pretty developed thing in our building. Before I introduce them and they kind of show you do you guys have any questions?
Is your staffing okay?
Staffing is okay at the current time. So as long as staffing stays in place, I think I've got an aide position open. So, but other than that, staffing is holding pretty steady right now.
Kids doing okay? Students doing okay with how the year's
So
progressing?
more kids in the building mean more needs, that's for sure. So they seem to be doing okay, but they do have their challenges. It's been different for students to go from not being in school from March of 2020 to being in school for the first time in August of 2021. I said that's probably the group that's had the biggest transition time. The most challenges are those students that left in March, were virtual all of last year, and are now returning to school for the first time in, a year and a half, basically. So that's the group that we definitely spend a lot of our time with, it seems like, just transitioning them back into middle school, especially in 6th grade. It's a huge transition going from elementary anyway, but the last time you were in school was as a 4th grader, and you weren't there as a 5th grader, and now you're a 6th grader. That's probably been our biggest challenge so far, but We have great staff. Dr. K and Dr. Reynolds have been very great at seeing what our needs are. So they communicate with me probably more than they probably want to communicate with me. I ask them a lot of questions at times, and they're outstanding at getting me what I need. And they've really addressed some of the areas that we need in our building, and they've gotten us the help and resources to make those challenges a little bit less.
So one of the things I want you to convey to your staff, your administrative staff and your faculty on behalf of the board, and I understand that the pandemic has resulted in some learning loss clearly across the state, and we've seen that. But one of the things, and it's a small victory, but I think we need to celebrate it, was what you pointed to on the ELA. The scores in Muncie Community Schools were more favorable in terms of learning loss statewide than the other districts on average.
Yeah.
So thank you for your work there.
Yeah.
And then secondly, one of the things that I think is critically important to recognize this year, and this is a first in probably 6 or 7 years, and that is, with the exception of Tippecanoe School Corporation, which is an outlier in the old North Central Conference, Muncie Community Schools has seen enrollment growth for the first time in that length of time, and that's contrary to every other school in the North Central Conference. And you're part of that, and we appreciate it, so thank you. With that, is any other questions for Mr. Grimm?
I do, just a quick one. So Eric, maybe this is Dr. K's question. So looking at the data, do you have a feedback loop with the elementaries on math and the other? So there is a feedback loop to help support the incoming students. Got it. Okay, good.
May I just say
You
one
may.
thing? So I would just like to recognize Mr. Grimm. He is an outstanding principal. He cares deeply about his students, about his staff. Every parent I talk to, he does a great job with communicating with them. And I know that when we're trying to think about things to do as a district, I always call Eric and say, how will this impact you? Is this a good idea? He's just a great person to troubleshoot with, and I just appreciate his leadership. And so I know all of your staff does too. So thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Grimm, is there anything that you at Northside or otherwise need from the board to make your job easier to help our students?
I can't say, we can always use more of everything. So, so that's kind of a question. And when you ask a teacher or a school person what they need, we can always use more. We can always use, more help here, more help here. But, typically when I need things, I will go to Dr. K and say, hey, this is what we need. This is, I met with her before our meeting with our attorney today and said, hey, this is a program that's not going the way I want to. I want to run some things by you. This is what we need. This is what I need to help this program. And Dr. K and Dr. Reynolds are awesome at getting me, what I need. So I would say right now we have to keep battling because that's what it takes in education. Education's hard. So it's not an easy occupation at all, and all of us that are in it certainly know how difficult it is every day.
Well, thank you. And who do you have with you tonight?
So I'm going to introduce our secondary teacher of the year, Isaac Denniston, and he's going to talk a little bit about what Titan TV does at Northside, and he'll introduce the students that he brought.
Thank you. Mr. Dennison, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Thank you to the school board. This group, as he has said, has been one that started earlier this year. We're actually right before winter break. I asked Mr. Grimm if it would be a good idea, and he said, let's go ahead and go with it. And so I really appreciate that and how he's been willing to try new and different things, especially how we were all trying new and different things in these crazy times of education. So what's going to happen is actually, I'm not going to tell you guys all about Titan TV. I wanted just 3 of our 80 students to come and kind of do a mock broadcast like we normally would do. And so what you'll see is we have someone who's a voiceover, we have someone who's a talent who you'll see him reading off of a teleprompter, and someone who's the producer and director, and I get to take the lovely job of sitting down in a chair, which I love. So if you'll give us just 1 second to bring the stuff into the middle, and I'll have them go ahead and start.
Coming to you live and taped from Northside Middle School Studio 105. Today is Tuesday, September 28th. Now, let's take it to on location to Muncie Community Schools Central Office with Liam.
Thanks, Nine. I am live here at the central office to let our school board know a little bit about Time TV. There's a lot to find out, so let's get right to it. First off, Time TV started right after lunch break. There was a call-out meeting and we had a total of 30 students sign up for the after-school club. Those 30 students were put into rotation, and from that we created our very first broadcast in MS News. It was really great. The other part of the MS News program is to keep students connected and informed with all things Northside. Next is 17 broadcasts featuring weekly announcements, weather, birthdays, sports highlights, and trivia challenge. We were able to connect not just the students inside our building, but all students who are virtual or born. This year, with our 80 students, we have already put together 6 broadcasts of MS News. News broadcasts are not the only thing we have produced. Last spring, we produced 4 different spotlights from Black History Month featuring 3 and studio interviews. We also put on 5 virtual performances for our band and choir, Southside Band and Central Band as well. Add to that, our virtual BRD showcased 2 award ceremonies. Our first ever live stream was our 8th grade celebration from last day of school last year. That's enough talking about the past. Now let's talk about the future. We hope to live stream more events, such as sporting events and musical performances. We already plan to live stream the choir concert next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Chambers Club. Our ultimate goal, though, is to have this club become a class one day. But until that day, we will keep on making broadcasts and connecting students. And with that, we have come to the end of this week's broadcast. Make sure to follow us all on our socials, smash that subscribe button on YouTube, and check out the names for Time TV crew members who work behind the scenes to make this production run smoothly this week. From all of us here at Time TV, I'm Liam. Stay classy.
Nice job, guys. And then we also wanted to present our original Titan TV mug to the school board. You guys can put it wherever you want to on a shelf somewhere. But
Thank you so much.
we want to say thank you. We wanted to say thank you so much for all the support with Titan TV and stuff, because it's not been easy to put on, but these students are fantastic, and we love the fact that whenever we do share something, especially on Twitter, within minutes, it's already shared by Dr. Reynolds half the time and also by Muncie Community Schools, and we absolutely love that, and the students love the support that we get from this. So thank you guys so much for having us this evening.
Mr. Denniston, could you bring your students up and have them introduce themselves?
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Leon. I'm in the 7th grade, and yeah.
Hey, Liam.
Yeah.
Hey, Liam.
Yeah.
Do you want to stand at the podium?
I'm in advanced choir, Mr. Dennison. He's a really good choir teacher. One of the best years I've ever had at Northside. Mr. Grimm's a really good principal. He always makes sure everyone does what they're supposed to do. It's good learning.
Do you want to be a broadcaster?
Maybe one day.
Do you have any questions for us?
Nope.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Abby. I am also in advanced choir with Mr. Denniston. I was in choir ever since he started, which was 6th grade, so I've had him for 3 years. And he's been an amazing teacher, actually. He's done funny skits, he's made us laugh, he's made us just happy to learn new songs and sing them. Last time I was in choir, I wasn't really happy with choir, and I was like on the verge of quitting choir, but my mom wanted me to pursue choir, and I'm so happy I made that choice, actually. Okay, that's it. I'm not gonna tell you. I'm not trying. I'm not trying today. Hi, my name is Nia Pryor. Even though they can't get it right, they call me Naya. I'm in advanced choir too, the Titations, and I've been in choir, I'd say in school for 2 years. I went in 6th grade, and then I did virtual for 7th, and I came back this year. And it's been a blast. He is an overall fun teacher, and you can tell that he actually enjoys teaching, that he is in there, instead of being someone that's just throwing music notes in people's faces constantly. He's there to make the kids laugh, and that's what's a part of being an overall great teacher and what makes it a great year. So I'm glad that I joined the choir. I've made great friends, and I've just overall been great to have this opportunity and being put in this spot. And my favorite food's mac and cheese. Bye.
And I'm just like smiling under here like.
Thank you for, thank you.
So quick question, Mr. Dennison or Mr. Grimm. Have you connected with Ball State University, our News Link or Sports Center to introduce the students to what we have over at Ball State that would be exciting to them in this regard?
That's definitely been a goal for this year. And as the club grows and everything, right now, the biggest thing that we're able to handle right now is doing our weekly broadcast, which takes, right now, they're doing it during their lunches, and it takes the whole week to put that all together. But like we said, in the future, we'd even love to see it turn into a class, and that would provide more opportunities, like things like that. Right now, the biggest thing that we've been able to handle is the weekly production. So that's definitely a goal, connecting with Ball State.
Mr. Grimm, Isaac, if you guys want to make it a class, why don't you put together a proposal and see what we can do? Okay?
Will do.
Okay.
They're always looking for more equipment in Titan TV too. So if you say there's one thing, if there's anything you have in Northside Middle School, I know Mr. Dennison always has a list of, okay, I would like a new one of these. So he may hit you up for that if you put that proposal out there for him.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay, Dr. Kwiatkowski, CEO comments.
Oh, yes. Do you know, we actually have one more. We still have Muncie Visitors Bureau.
I'm sorry. Muncie Visitors Bureau? Is anybody here?
Oh, that's me.
Yes.
Mr. President and
Basham, how are you?
members of the school board, it's my pleasure to be with you and Dr. Kwiatkowski and your cabinet. So good to be back home again with so many familiar faces and friends. I'm here tonight, however, representing Muncie Rotary. We have enjoyed a longstanding partnership with the Delaware County Fair and Muncie Central High School. When I was interim principal at Central, I realized how difficult it was for small teams of athletes and scholars to raise money. And so we partnered with Delaware County Fair to be the welcoming faces at the main gate each year at the county fair. Now let me tell you, it's a long week. Don't get me wrong, we earn every penny that we give to you tonight. But I'm thrilled that on Monday night, from July 19th through July 24th, we are delivering checks for $450 to 6 small teams that were our partners at the main gate. So if tonight any of the coaches are here, please come and get your check. From the girls golf team, Larry Alexander, $450. From the National Honor Society, Lisa Letzinger, $450. Thank you. It really is a great time, honestly. Great time every night. From Muncie Central Girls JV basketball team, Ron Howell, $450. For the Muncie Central High School tennis team, Don Wafer, $450. From the Muncie Central girls soccer team, Laura Brandt here. Good. Thank you so much. And that's it. Actually, the girls basketball team does 2 nights. And so they get $900 for a couple nights worth of work. Thank you.
Mr. Basham, thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing with the Visitor Bureau. We're neighbors, obviously.
Right.
We-
VIP tent this weekend.
Yep.
Thursday night.
Yep.
Don't miss Muncie Marathon and Ironman. It's going to be epic.
Thank you for your work
Thank
and
you.
for your donations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay. Dr. Kwiatkowski?
Well, thank you. Tonight I have a pretty quick board update. I wanted to share that Beth Bueller, one of our teachers from East Washington Academy, wrote a grant to the Community Foundation, and she was one that was selected. It was in the Muncie Star over the weekend, and she will use the funds with her High Ability program. Beth does an outstanding job. I always enjoy going and visiting her classroom. Today we had our principals in. It was an early release. Well, it's actually parent-teacher conferences. Teachers were busy meeting with parents, and our principals had the opportunity to come for some professional development. So our attorneys helped us, making sure we kept up on federal and state statutes, making sure that we're doing everything we can to educate all of our students and keeping all students safe. And so we appreciated that. My cabinet, we've been out in schools, and it energizes all of us. When we go into the schools, the students and the teachers, what we see happening, it's lots of good things.
Any questions for Dr. K?
Just the grant, what, was that Kitzelman or was that a?
So it was just a community school grant. The Robert Bell, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, we're on to public comment. Julie Snyder.
So we have a
Hello, Julie Snyder, teacher at Muncie Central. I will be very brief. I just thought I would tell you guys that we had a great time today at our meeting with Ball State. We, for our 2-hour release time, the high school teachers went and met with all of the different sciences and humanities groups and math teachers and art teachers. I mean, everyone was there. They had some representation from literally every department. And they had it set up in the ballroom with, tables where it was kind of like speed dating in a way. We got to go around and talk to everybody. But I just wanted to, I was talking to Dr. Reynolds beforehand. I had a great discussion with the political science teachers. I teach government. And I'm always looking for a way to be more innovative, but also just a way to, I think, introduce my seniors to that next level, especially since I teach AP and dual credit. And so we had a really good conversation about me just coming to their classes for days where they might have a panel or a guest speaker or something going on. And so I was kind of knocking it around, and we were talking about how would that be if, let's say 3 days before we say, hey, would you be able to come to this panel we're having in political science, 350? And so I was talking to Dr. Reynolds and said, would that be feasible? Because I know it would be hard to get the paperwork through and all of that, but if I just wanted to take kids for one period to over on campus, and with block, it's very, very feasible to do that. We could run over there and get back, and hopefully we can all work together to make that happen, because that's what I was envisioning, instead of having to plan it weeks in advance or whatever, just being able to go to one of their classes or them come to one of mine and do stuff.
Yeah, I see no reason that can't happen.
Yeah, they were very open to it. It was a great afternoon of just talking about things like that, and I, for one, think my kids would love it. They love getting outside the building, so I try to do that as often as possible. And we could definitely, MITS bus could get us there. Heck, they wouldn't like it, but I could make them walk. It's not that far, right? But I just thought I would let you know it was great. That was when we talk about a partnership, that's what I was envisioning.
Okay.
So thank you for
you,
making
Ms.
it
Snyder.
happen. Thanks.
Mr. Bolts, Phil Bolts.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Bolts.
Hi. It's really good to be able to attend the meeting this month. I'm really excited. I'm Phil Bolts, community organizer, supporter, educator, advocate. I have two daughters at East Washington Academy in the High Ability Program. Got the name right. And they both enjoy and they've been greatly benefited by that. Thank you for that program and what MCS offers to our community. I'm a proud Munsonian. And I have been a vocal supporter of public education and development since I returned to Muncie in 2011 to pursue my PhD in education. In our community, I helped organize events and organization with a group called Muncie Resists, which was created to amplify the progressive community voice in East Central Indiana. Recently, there was an event in Muncie which purported to advance public discussion of critical race theory, social emotional learning, and other critical issues facing our community. This event wasn't publicly accessible online, and Muncie Resist has convened a broad panel of educational practice and philosophy experts within our community to address the questions being raised in that community. That event is on October the 7th at 7 p.m. It is available via Facebook, Muncie Resist. The event is called Critical Insights: The Truth About Critical Race Theory, Social Emotional Learning, and Education, and school practice. Questions such as, do public schools have a role in discussing or educating students about race? Are reflective and social and emotional practices a beneficial part of education in the United States? So we would invite everyone to join us for a panel discussion of current practices within the schools with elementary and education multicultural education scholars and advocates from our community. Bring your questions and walk, or because it's online, click away, I suppose. Walk away with essential resources and literature about these issues. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. Yeah.
Mr. Borgman?
Oh.
Not as tall as he is. I'm Jim Borgman. I've been in Muncie, Indiana now for 35 years. Seems amazing. I'm here as a community volunteer. I have for years have served as the chairman of the IU Health Baltimore Hospital Foundation, Minnetrista, and the Children's Museum. And I am, if any teachers were here, what would be called a problem student. It made it through because certain teachers found ways to help with social emotional learning. So I would be a proponent of that. All of us, all students show up with different backgrounds, different emotions, different problems. And if you try to teach them or treat them all the same way, they do not work. So you'll lose them immediately. I've been a basketball coach in the area for years, lastly at Burris. It's the same thing. It's the same thing when you employ people. I wouldn't tell everybody that you've got to be the same way at our law firm. I would find the way to make it best for them. That's our job as leaders, is to give them the opportunity to succeed. And the school board's the same way. If you're going to meet every child at the same place, you're going to lose them. So you've got to recognize that they do come with different social backgrounds, different race backgrounds, different emotional backgrounds. And whether it's called critical race theory or just caring, make it caring. Go find each way to make a better day for all those kids. And I encourage you to look at all opportunities to innovate every chance you can. Obviously, the scores are better, but they're not where you want them. They're not where the students want them. And so we're not meeting every need we can. So until we're doing the best we can with every student, we have to look at every opportunity. Whatever name you want to call it, whatever way you want to treat it, just find the best way to get them the best result. And thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Jim Arnold, Mr. Arnold?
I'm Jim Arnold, parent, concerned citizen, and taxpayer. I'm here tonight to read what I was not allowed to read at last meeting, the Parent Education Bill of Rights by Todd Rokita, Attorney General of Indiana. 1, you have the right and expectation to question, and address your child's school officials and school board members at publicly designated meetings with proper notice of the meeting provided. You have the right and expectation to question and review the curriculum taught in your child's school by questioning local school board and school administrators. You have the right and expectation that the academic curriculum taught in your child's school aligns with Indiana and federal law. 4, you have the right and expectation to participate in the selection and approval of academic standards for the state of Indiana. Number 5, you have the right and expectation to obtain educational materials and curriculum taught to your child in the classroom. And number 6, you have the right to run as a candidate for your local school board, unless, of course, you live in Muncie, Indiana, that has unelected school board members. But I will leave that discussion for another day or another speaker. I came to the 914 meeting intended to read the student and parent rights into the record as a precursor to future participation. When not allowed to speak at the 914 meeting, I went back and looked at that meeting and also the meeting, the emergency meeting from 8/3/21, 8/10/21, and 8/24/21. And all 3 of those meetings included the call to order in the public display on YouTube, the call to order, the moment of silence, pledge of allegiance, and the roll call. The 914 meeting started partway into the first speaker. My question to the board is, what happened to the first part of the 9/14/21 meeting where I was denied my right to speak on a technicality and another citizen was ejected from the meeting without cause? Mr. Williams clearly stated that the meeting had been called to order and that no one had signed up to speak, hence I could not speak. So, if the meeting had been called to order, where is the public record video of that part of the meeting? And what purpose does the pre-meeting sign-up requirement serve other than limiting the participation of the public?
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Cameron Grubbs?
Good evening, board. I just want to come up here for a couple quick things. One is to thank you for setting an example to the rest of Delaware County with the masks and everything that Muncie Community Schools have really stepped up. Unfortunately, other schools aren't really following as I wish that they would, but I appreciate what you all are doing with that. I did also want to ask about something that I've recently encountered at some of the schools when I visited some of the schools, is that there's no visual cues to anybody who may be deaf or hard of hearing. When you go to the security button, you'll hit the button, and if you can hear them address you, then you can tell them what you're there for. But if somebody's hard of hearing or deaf, they wouldn't be able to do that. And then once you pass that and they go to let you in, there's a small little click, but there are no visual cues to say, hey, the door is unlocked. Also, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to be able to have the ability to open the door remotely. So if someone were to be, in a wheelchair or something like that, it'd be great for them to have the door open for them remotely so that they could then enter the building. But lastly, I just wanted to tell you all that you were doing a good job. I think, part of the Bill of Rights for parents would be to not have the teaching curriculum hijacked by people that believe in the conspiracy theories and things like that, and to have truth. And I appreciate what y'all are doing. And let's not give in to a vocal minority. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grubbs. Mr. Hyatt? Pardon me? Okay. Thank you. Andy, no, this was the only sheet? Okay. At this point, I would ask the board, given the circumstances statewide, nationwide, and other, to move up, for a motion to move up dialogue of the board in front of the consent agenda and out in order for a presentation to be made regarding many of those issues that are facing schools across the state, across the nation. I have a presentation, if the board would indulge me in those. It's for the benefit of those who are streaming and otherwise. I have gone over this with Dr. K. and I believe it will be helpful to our students, their families, and the broader community. So I would entertain a motion to move up the dialogue at this point.
Motion to approve. Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
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 Okay, thank you. So we are at a unique place in the life of our nation as we face pandemic, economic issues, political division, and schools have not been exempted from this disruption. I spoke in Indianapolis with Dr. Jenner recently, where we talked about the fact that COVID has been a multiplier. Where we had challenges already, the pandemic has multiplied those challenges. People are anxious. We have economic uncertainty, and education, while it provides the surest path through that anxiety, has become in many ways a political football. I'm going to spend some time this evening, and if you'll indulge me, going through some background. It is at a high level, and it is, some of this is by way of example, but I will be specific when that's the case. I want to go for a moment and speak about House Enrolled Act 1315, which created the venue where we sit tonight with this group. That was passed in special session, May of 2018 by the Indiana General Assembly to create the historic partnership between Ball State University and Muncie Community Schools. This legislation was passed to enable our schools, and this is a quotation from the statute, to take advantage of its relationship with the university and grants the district all administrative and academic flexibility to implement innovative strategies. The statute required the submission of an academic innovation and financial viability plan by June the 30th, 2020. This has occurred. It is available on our website, and hard copies would be available upon request. The mission statement includes the phrase placing learners first, and that has been the guiding lodestar for this board. The development of this plan was a community-wide effort. With the assistance of the United Way, we held over 50 listening sessions throughout the city. We heard from over 500 parents and caregivers, from over 20 local nonprofits and foundations, from most of our Muncie Community School faculty, and a broad-based national panel of educational experts. A significant part of that plan, again driven by parents, faculty, local funders, and nationally recognized educators, was social emotional learning. So social emotional learning, which has become controversial, I'm going to talk about what it is. In this political divisive time so full of misinformation and resultant anxieties, we have received a number of questions about the need for social emotional learning and its curricula in our public schools. In short, SEL, which is what I'll call it, promotes whole child development by teaching skills like self-regulation, persistence, empathy, self-awareness, and mindfulness. Practically speaking, it teaches students to regulate their emotions, to pay attention, and to work well with peers. All you have to do is look at the news on social media or on your television at night, and you can see that some of those lessons have been lost on our fellow citizens. All of these are valuable and important attributes of educational and personal growth and success. The curricula used at MCS is Second Step Success. If anyone wishes to see it, we will happily get you a complete copy. This is not a new curriculum. The Bush administration named this an exemplary program in 2001. While we may wish to believe that these life skills are with our students when they arrive at the schoolhouse door, some of our learners come from backgrounds where they do not receive modeling of these behaviors from any adult, sibling, or peer. In fact, the modeling is often counterproductive. To those who question the need for such learning modules, whether out of sincere interest or political mischief, I would ask the following questions. And some of this is driven by my experience as a trial judge in Union County, Indiana, Liberty, where I had jurisdiction, including criminal, domestic, and juvenile. I would ask these questions. Did you move 10 or more times, at least twice due to eviction, between the ages of 5 and 18? Did one or both parents spend at least a month in jail or prison during your childhood? Did one of your parents die a premature death due to drugs, violence, or insufficient medical care? Did you grow up in a household with no books? Have you ever lived in a vehicle for any period of time? Have you or a sibling ever been a victim of abuse, neglect, or sexual assault? Have you been in your house to witness an act of domestic violence against a parent or a caregiver? Have you ever been sick with strep throat, bronchitis, the flu, a tooth infection, scabies, or head lice, and not had adequate medical intervention? Have you ever gone to school hungry or to bed hungry? Have you ever witnessed a caregiver commit an act of unimaginable cruelty to a family pet? And I could go on. During the last 30 years of practicing law, serving as a trial judge with criminal and juvenile jurisdiction, a mediator with domestic cases, including today, an arbitrator, and in working and volunteering in public schools, I have worked with many young learners who have endured one or sometimes several of these traumas. As we've learned more precisely over the last 20 years through brain science, traumas of this magnitude for any person, but especially for someone with a developing body and brain, will wreak emotional and physical havoc. They are in fact a form of malignancy. SEL is simply one of many tools that our magnificent educators use to help and educate children. When people ask if there is any political agenda, hidden or otherwise, we should answer, honestly and truthfully, that the only agenda is to do our level best to help our children get to a point where they can feel a sense of confidence and security that enables them to learn, that gives them a sense of hope, and that helps them to see a path where they can be in greater control of their destinies as adults through perseverance, self-reliance, and reaching out to loved ones, family, and trusted others for help when they need it. On a personal note, emphasizing this or illustrating it perhaps, I was born in 1966. My brother was born in 1970. While we had good parents, I can say without reservation that my own social and emotional learning was enhanced by none other than Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood debuted in 1968. It ran until 2001. This program, for those who may not have seen it, was on PBS and emphasized young children's social and emotional needs. Rogers taught young children about civility, sharing, tolerance, and self-worth. Like many in this room, I also learned these lessons or had them emphasized from several of my teachers. In my case, I think of Mrs. Marion Pope, my third grade teacher at Kitchell Elementary, who recently died as she neared the age of 100. So I suppose that this may be political with the broadest possible definition, but not in the nefarious manner that some would have you believe. Now turning to social studies and English language arts. What is our goals for social studies? And Mrs. Snyder's here tonight, and some of this comes from her department. What it is our goal to develop citizens that will perpetuate our democratic traditions, aware that we work with one another to move forward. Developing human beings that understand that no one's experience is universal. Developing students that are seekers, privileging learning over knowledge. Learning history through the experience of more than one perspective. Learning government and economics with a consciousness of how policies impact different people in different ways. What it is not classrooms built up from lecture and thoughtless rote memorization of trivia, names, and dates. In my case, as much as I loved Union County High School and as much as I loved Kelly Drake, who taught history, it was terribly, terribly, terribly boring. God rest Mr. Drake's soul. It is not the imposition of a worldview that attempts to set or prescribe norms, and it's history. It's not history detached from the present, because history is a continuum, as I will talk about in a moment, and it is not critical race theory. That leads to my next point or discussion. Critical race theory. What is it? We've heard the term critical race theory a good bit over the past several months. I saw at one point where critical race theory was noted on CNN one day like 277 times during the course of a day. However, when I have inquired, the vast majority of people do not have a correct understanding of what that term entails or means. As a result, misinformation and misunderstanding have filled the vacuum. Anytime there's misinformation being disseminated for primarily political purposes on either side of this spectrum, One of the goals is to create fear and apprehension among listeners. This false anxiety is then used to drive a political agenda, whether that be from the right or the left. With that background, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, several law schools in the United States saw the emergence of critical legal studies. Note that's separate and distinct from critical race theory. Critical legal studies, or CLS, developed as a branch of legal studies during that period of time, again, the late 1960s, early 1970s. Its genesis at that time, or its beginning, was a natural outgrowth of upheaval over the Vietnam War, frustration with the pace of the civil rights movement, and general dissatisfaction with the political status quo exemplified by the Nixon administration scandals that culminated in Watergate. As I will discuss in a moment, critical legal studies, again, formed the foundation on which critical race theory then emerged. At its core, though deep differences have emerged among and between scholars of critical legal theories, imagine that, differences between scholars, it alleges that laws, both legislatively enacted statutes and court-driven common law, have been constructed or construed or drafted in a manner to maintain status quo power structures that create significant economic and social hurdles for marginalized groups. Marginalized groups have been defined in that scholarly study without limitation by gender, national origin, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or the economically impoverished. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Harvard Law School's first black tenured professor, Derek Bell, wrote a law journal article entitled Brown versus Board of Education and the Interest Convergence Dilemma. That law journal article formed the core basis for the beginning of critical race theory. By way of background, Bell received tenure at Harvard in 1971. Prior to that, he was a lawyer at the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, handling civil rights litigation. Bit of history, the LDF, or Legal Defense Fund's predecessor in interest, with Thurgood Marshall as the lead trial lawyer, handled the Brown case, resulting in the Supreme Court's 1954 decision in Brown versus Board of Education, desegregating public schools across much of the United States. Even in 1980, Professor Bell's article was deeply controversial in that it critically questioned the NAACP's strategy of integration. For many, the Brown decision was thought to represent a moral awakening and the prevalence of decency among a core majority of American citizens. Bell theorized in his argument that, to the contrary, the court's determination was the result of an interest convergence and Cold War pragmatism. In short, as the U.S. was locked in its struggle with the Soviet Union, the images of racial oppression in the U.S. handed the Soviets a propaganda weapon to wield at home, in Eastern Europe, and in third world countries. Consequently, according to Bell's theory, and it was and remains a theory, the court's Brown decision was an effective means to deprive the Soviets of a propaganda tool and was in the broader political interest of the United States. While Bell's theories were subject and remain subject to criticisms from a number of quarters, they gained tractions with a group of academics at several other law schools. Along with Bell, these professors formed the basis of the critical race theory movement throughout the 1980s. CRT has evolved as a natural derivative of critical legal studies. In this regard, CRT does not attribute racism to white people as individuals or even to entire groups of people. Simply put, CRT states that U.S. social institutions, the criminal justice system, the education system, the labor market, the housing market, and the healthcare system are laced with racism embedded in laws, rules, regulations, and procedures that lead to different outcomes by race. In August of 2021, a group talked about states and their reaction to critical race theory. CRT has become a political football as significant portions of the United States argue, and scholars argue, that labeling U.S. institutions as racist is a broad-based a broad-based assertion that anyone associated with those institutions is also a racist. This defensive posture has also extended to the assertion that K-12 students lack the intellectual capacity or maturity to address CRT with all of its nuances and complexities. And I think you can see from my even very brief introduction that it is extremely nuanced and it is extremely complex. As to this latter assertion regarding those complexities and nuances, critical race theory has historically found its home and will continue to historically find its home in college and law school classrooms. On the contrary, at MCS, it is our goal to provide a diverse educational experience that emphasizes culturally responsive and diverse approaches to learning. This is fundamentally distinct from and different from any relationship to CRT, both in theory and in practice. Our approach, relying heavily on primary source materials, is constructed in order to provide MCS students with exposure to a broad array of academic materials in English language arts and social studies. While certain events in U.S. history will not and should not avoid the specter of racism, i.e. slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement, for examples, and the histories related to thereto, this does not involve teaching or exploration of CRT at the K-12 level. As noted, this is generally a topic suited for law schools or specific undergraduate college and university programs. By way of example, an example only, I'm going through a following list of things that we can and should study. And Mrs. Snyder, I think some of this you are already doing, but these are things that I think will give you an indication, and those watching tonight, an indication of the approach that the board advocates. And I'm walking through this in chronological fashion because I think it will be easier to understand. We can and should study the Declaration of Independence, the genius of the second paragraph that Jefferson drafted in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When that was drafted and then adopted in July of 1776, the world had never seen anything like it. When you're thinking about the nation states in Europe, which was the primary political basis of which the world was aware, this was radical. Mount Holyoke historian Joseph Ellis says, this phrase contains, quote, the most potent and consequential words in American history. Over time, this passage has come to represent a moral standard to which the United States should strive. However, we can and should understand that in July of 1776, this phrase applied, as Jefferson drafted it, only to white men of property. We can and should study the United States Constitution in all of its genius, its 1787 drafting and its ratification in 1789. The genius of Articles 1, 2, and 3, creating a separation of powers and checks and balances, and the Bill of Rights, conferring heretofore unheard of freedom on certain citizens. We should also and can and should study the compromises that permitted its ratification. Specifically think of Article 1, Section 2, the 3/5 clause, and Article 1, Section 9, preserving the international slave trade for those states that wish to preserve it to 1808. We can and should study that certain founders, including Ben Franklin, recognized at the time the moral atrocity of owning human beings, and Robert Carter III, who began freeing his slaves en masse in 1791. And that those founders at that time saw fit to draft and adopt the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, banning slavery in the territory, including the area where we sit tonight. We can and should study Crispus Attucks, the man at the Boston Massacre in 1770, the first black man killed in the fight for freedom. We should also study the high school in Indianapolis and Oscar Robertson and the struggles he underwent in the mid-1950s playing for the state championship. We can and should study the Seneca Falls Declaration in 1848, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Frederick Douglass all came together for the first time to express full support for women's equality. We can and should study the consequential presidencies of Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams, but we should also study Jackson's abhorrent conduct as it concerned Native Americans and their relocation during the 1830s. We can and should study Nat Turner and the 1831 slave rebellion in Virginia that hardened attitudes throughout the country as it concerned fugitive slaves. We can and should study Frederick Douglass and his genius, William Lloyd Garrison, writing for the Liberator, the ferocious John Brown, Henry Clay of Kentucky, John Calhoun of South Carolina, and Daniel Webster, who forged compromises preserving the Union until the Civil War broke out. We can and should think about Chief Justice John Marshall on the United States Supreme Court enshrining the concept of judicial review, whereby Chief Justice in the Supreme Court was able to pass on the Constitution of Congress's statutes. At the same time, we can and should study the acts of Chief Justice Roger Taney with his terrible decision in Dred Scott in 1857, where the court held that the United States Constitution was not meant to include American citizenship for people of African descent, regardless of whether they were enslaved or free. We can and should study Abraham Lincoln, his evolution and maturation from the Cooper Union speech in 1860 to the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation after the Battle of Antietam in the fall of 1862 being issued in January of 1863, to the Gettysburg Address in November of 1863, where Lincoln engrafted the equality clause of the Declaration of Independence onto the Constitution, to his best speech, the second inaugural, in March of 1865. In thinking about Lincoln, we can and should study at the close of the war, where he gave a speech in April of 1865, where the first time he mused about extending the franchise or the vote to emancipated slaves. We can and should study that John Wilkes Booth was in the crowd that night. When he heard that, he said, that's the last speech he'll ever give, and then he killed Lincoln a couple of days later. We can and should study the Iron Brigade. Its first day at Gettysburg. The Iron Brigade included the 20th Indiana, commanded for a time by a man named Samuel James Williams of Selma, Indiana, right not too far from where Mark Irvin lives, until he was killed at the Wilderness in 1864. We can and should study and think about the 54th Massachusetts, including others who were black troops commanded by Robert Gould Shaw and immortalized in the movie Glory. We can and should study Reconstruction, 1866 to 1876, and the remarkable passage of the Civil Rights Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, that resulted in the first black United States Senator, Hiram Revels of Mississippi, being elected. Many of you probably don't know, but Revels attended Beech Grove Quaker Seminary, a school in Union County, Indiana, where I grew up. We can and should study the Compromise of 1876, whereby the presidency was traded to Rutherford B. Hayes in his race against Samuel Tilden, thereby clearing the way for 90 additional years of Jim Crow to exist throughout the South. We can and should explore the genius of the American experiment in the post-Civil War industrial explosion from a primarily rural agrarian society to an industrial society. It's very similar to our transition to a heavy tech economy right now, where great fortunes were made with Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan giving rise to our modern economy, and then Theodore Roosevelt's response in attempting to rein in their excesses during his presidency. We can and should be aware and study the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890, and the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, where the court, to its shame, ruled separate but equal to be the law of the land, understanding that separate did not mean equal. We can and should study that great President Theodore Roosevelt having Booker T. Washington of the Tuskegee Institute to the White House in 1905, and the controversy that generated across the nation. We can and should, as good Hoosiers, study Madam Walker, purported to be the first self-made woman millionaire who came to Indianapolis in 1910. We can and should study Woodrow Wilson, a Virginian, seeking to make the world safe for democracy, but took race relations backwards while resegregating government offices in District of Columbia and screening Birth of a Nation at the White House in 1915. Turning to World War I, we can and should recognize the courage and bravery of General MacArthur as he led the 42nd Rainbow Division, including the 69th New York, consisting of poor Irish immigrants from the island of Manhattan. We should also study and think about the Harlem Hellfighters, who fought with equal courage on the Western Front alongside French troops. Turning to the 1920s, American culture was coming into its own, literature, music being two great examples. We can and should study the great literary figures coming out of that period. Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Elaine Locke of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes, Pearl Buck, Zora Neale Hurston, and others like Ralph Ellison and Richard Wright, who came later. We can and should study the Great Migration, as hundreds of thousands of our black citizens left the states of the old Confederacy and moved north to cities like Muncie, our own Mary Dollison being a part of the tail end of that Great Migration. As we go to the 1930s and the scourge of the Great Depression, we can and should celebrate the ingenuity of the American spirit with the building of Hoover Dam and Rockefeller Center in the midst of a Great Depression, thereby giving so many citizens much-needed jobs. We can and should celebrate that great black contralto, Marian Anderson, who sang at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939 with Eleanor Roosevelt's intervention after she was denied access to Constitution Hall by the Daughters of the American Revolution. We can and should celebrate and study the life of Benjamin V. Cohen, a Jewish man born in Muncie in 1894, attended the University of Chicago and Harvard Law School, and became the principal drafter, along with Tommy Cochran, of much of the New Deal legislation that passed in that consequential decade. Turning to World War II, we can and should be aware of and study Dory Miller, a mess steward confined to that role by his race on the USS West Virginia, who on December 7, 1941, after his captain had been killed, took up a gun and eventually received the Navy Cross for his heroism on that day. We can and should study the Tuskegee Airmen, Navajo Code Talkers, the Women's Army Air Corps, Rosie the Riveter, all those women who went to work among those at Ford's Willow Run plant, which was turning out B-24s at the average of about 1 an hour. And for those of you who don't know, B-24 Liberators is a massive 4-engine bomber, and the United States was making 1 an hour. This is just a bit of a digression, but at the end of the war, the German army was still using horses to pull its guns. And there were just General Motors, Ford, they were just overwhelmed. We should celebrate that. We should celebrate the genius of Ernie Pyle from just down the road in, I believe it was Dana, Indiana, as he reported on the common soldier, both in Europe and in the Pacific. We can and should study Eisenhower as using his social emotional genius to cobble together a coalition of disparate nations in order to defeat the greatest threat to humankind, the Nazis. We can and should think and talk about the lesson of the internment of Japanese Americans, and again, the shame on the Supreme Court of affirming that decision in a case called Korematsu. We can and should celebrate Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby. Jackie Robinson integrating the National League with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and Larry Doby integrating the American League, I believe, with the Cleveland Indians. We can and should, as we turn to the 1950s, study Thurgood Marshall and his work as a lawyer. His role in the Supreme Court has often eclipsed his role as a courageous lawyer working throughout the South, fighting for integration. Marshall's work, among others, paved the way for so many, including our own Judge Robert Wilkins of Muncie Northside, who currently serves on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, often said to be the second highest court in the land. We can and should celebrate the heroism of General O.P. Smith and Lieutenant Colonel Don Faith at Chosin Reservoir. Don Faith grew up in Washington, Indiana, and received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions in the winter of 1950 in North Korea. We can and should study Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks in Montgomery, the Freedom Summer, where Andrew Goodman was trained right down the road at Miami of Ohio Western College before he went in, along with Michael Schwerner and James Chaney, to help register people to vote in that consequential summer of 1964 that resulted in the three of them being murdered and buried in an earthen dam by the Klan. Turning to culture again, we can and should explore the written work in the 1960s of James Baldwin, Harper Lee, and Indiana's own Kurt Vonnegut, the music of Motown, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, the Supremes, and Indiana's own Jackson 5. The Bakersfield Sound with Buck Owens and Merle Haggard, and the folk music coming out of New York and California with Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. We can and should celebrate American ingenuity at work in space, in the space program with the Gemini and Apollo missions. Gus Grissom in the Gemini missions and perishing on the landing pad to the Challenger disaster in 1986. In January of 1986, on the Challenger, among the crew members was a man named Ronald McNair, a black man who was born in South Carolina in 1950, when Jim Crow was still very real, to receive his PhD at the MIT, and then become a crew member on the Challenger, where he perished alongside a social studies teacher named Krista McAuliffe from New Hampshire. We can and should study the Cold War's end in the late 1980s as the United States continued at that time to be a beacon to freedom-seeking people all over the world, with the Iron Curtain managing to fall peacefully, which was no guarantee. And we could and should go on, but time prevents it. But this is an example of a broad perspective approach to social studies and English language arts. Again, this is not critical race theory. This is the ability to see the world from a number of different and unique perspectives. As our students attend school, they want and crave to understand the story of where we came from, and that some of those people look like me. They came from circumstances like me, and they overcame them. This is a lesson which should not and cannot be lost on our learners. With that being said, John Meacham wrote a book last year, and I'm almost done, called The Soul of America. And in that, he has a quote from William L. Shirer. William L. Shirer was in Germany just prior to the American involvement in the war. Shirer was one of Edward R. Murrow's contemporaries working for CBS Radio. This quote is from Meacham's book. William L. Shirer, who had covered Nazi Germany, wrote on returning home, "I had seen these poisons grow into an ugly witch hunting and worse in the totalitarian lands abroad, but I was not prepared to find them taking root in our own splendid democracy." And I will tell you that my observation as a student of history is that we have some of those divisions occurring right now, and they are not healthy. I'm now going to turn to Harper Lee. My favorite novel of all time is To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee wrote that in the late 50s, I believe. She was native of Alabama, and one of her protagonists in that story is a lawyer named Atticus Finch. And Atticus is a widower raising his two children, Jim and Scout. And he's talking to Scout after her first day of school, and he says, quote, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." This quote from Atticus teaches Scout that before you judge or disagree with someone, you should put yourself in their shoes, even though you might disagree with it. So, the greatness of America from my perspective, and I'm speaking for myself here, is a mosaic of diversity that, against high odds and threats both foreign and domestic, has come together and thrived to be the longest surviving republic in the history of the world. For it to continue, we must work to walk around in each other's shoes, to paraphrase Atticus, and to see both ourselves and each other from a perspective of grace and learning. As that great industrialist Malcolm Forbes said, diversity is the art of thinking independently together. We can and should and will, as long as we sit in these seats, to equip our learners with a thorough, rich, and diverse curriculum that enables them to enter the world with skills, knowledge, and dispositions to thrive as active citizens in a democratic and global society. Thank you. I apologize for the length of that. We're on to our consent agenda. You have those items in front of you from the consent agenda. Are there any questions or changes to those items?
Move to approve.
A motion to approve. Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Passed. Mr. Jerome, financial report.
Yes, thank you. Included in your board pack at this time were some fiscal health indicators. These fiscal health indicators, the state of Indiana put these together about 3 years ago to put them in front of school districts and school boards to make sure that the school district is trending in the correct way. So I had a chance with our Forecast 5 data software. We received our information just recently. We had some updated data, so I just put the first slide up there. Thank you very much. And really what they're just trying to show there is trend. What you're looking there on the bottom is just your total cash balance of all your funds. That's what's along the bottom there, your total cash balance of all your funds. And the green line is revenue, the kind of the orange line is expenses. So it's always better to have more revenue than expenses. And that's showing really the trend from about 2017 through 2020 that you have there, where that blue wave on the clear on the far right on the bottom, that's about 27.9 million of cash balance. And so that's a good thing. And then the trend above it, as you can see, that spread between revenue and expenditures has been trending the correct way over the last 4 years. So if we can just go to the next one. Okay, that's just showing our approved budget appropriations over the last, it shows it since 2012. The relevant years, I would say, is probably the last 3 years you have showing there. 2020 shows about 6 million higher than 2021. That's because the Department of Local Government Finance had asked us to appropriate the transfer from education to operation. We no longer have to do that. That's why it went down to 50 million in 2021. For 2022, because it doesn't show that, it's only 51.8 million was our advertised budget for that particular year we just did. We'll go to the next slide, number 3. I wanted to just show, if I could, the tax cap that happens here in the Muncie Community School District. And what you see on the far right, when you see those green, you see all those bars, all those columns are growing over time. There in 2021, that's almost $12 million of tax cap. And just to rephrase that, what does that mean when we talk about tax cap? Currently, the way the law is, homeowners have a 1% tax cap, 2% for agriculture and other residential, and all other property, including commercials, a 3% tax cap. And that's just something we live with. That's something we live with here. It's in statute. As you can see, the trend for Muncie schools, it has gone higher. So more property owners hit the cap. So when that happens, we receive less property taxes. But that's is put in place by statute to benefit the taxpayers. So I'm just showing those particular funds. It primarily only impacts, as you can see, the operation fund. That's why that's in green. So we can go to the next one. Just wanted to show, once again, this is kind of a circuit breaker tax cap impact again. I just wanted to show some school districts comparing us against some districts that might be similar size. And I picked the athletic schools from our North Central Conference. I highlighted Muncie Community Schools on the far left there, which shows we have a tax cap of almost $12 million, and the levy is clear up almost $23 million, so we lose that gap between that yellow dot and the bar right below it. If you compare that to other schools beside it, even if you can't see the fine print, that's comparing Anderson, Kokomo, Marion, Richmond, Logansport, and Lafayette, and the one on the far right, which is almost skews the numbers for themselves, is Tippecanoe School Corporation. That is the donut district around Purdue University. That is a very growing district, and it just tries to show some comparison. We're not alone in having tax caps, of course, but we're certainly one of the largest tax cap districts in the state. Go to the next one if we could. We're almost done there. I wanted to show here our overall fund balance from about three of our main funds. I took the education fund, operation fund, and rainy day fund, and then we compared our spending versus that cash balance, and our number is a little over 45%. So that's higher is better. In other words, you'd like to have a high cash balance, and this is what it's showing that. So if you look at Logansport on the far right, very hard to see, they only have a 3% of a spending of their cash balance. So they don't have as much cash on hand. For us at Muncie, we're certainly benefited because we did receive $12 million from the state of Indiana, and we have put $9 million of that in the rainy day fund. So it is still there with us, and we're still paying back our state loan. So we have trended in the correct direction. Now, if you go to the very last slide, I took some of this particular slide, if you include all your entire funds, it's like an ice cream cone layer of colors and flavors there, but it's almost too messy with all those colors, but we just did, on the far right, as you can see, we're only comparing 3 funds for Muncie schools. That was education, operation, and rainy day. And as you can see, we have trended up. We have trended up the last 4 years, and there's that 45% cash balance again compared on our spending. So once again, our fund balances have gone up, and that is a good thing. And you can see, yes, we cratered, and Muncie did not do so good back in that 2015, 16, and 17 timeframe, but it has gotten better since. So we're trying to show trend as a fiscal health indicator. That's one way of measuring it, and I just wanted to give you that brief update.
I just think, building on something you said earlier, part of our statute was to build a sustainable financial plan. And I think, certainly the administration should be applauded for that effort. This is a really good report. There are all challenges. We have a lot of needs, so we can never have enough. But I think Dr. Kay and Brad and Chuck and team have done a wonderful job of doing the best we can and delivering quality education, and I think that's indicative with all the trends. So I'll move approval of the financial report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eater. Any additional questions? Entertain a second.
Second.
Dr. O'Neill, second. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. Diane?
Thank you, President Williams. Good evening, everyone. The Indiana Department of Ed requires that school corporations adopt a policy for the distribution of teacher appreciation grants. It's also known as TAG. The TAG policy has to be adopted every year. The IDOE wants to ensure that this money goes to our well-deserving teachers. Last year, MCS received about $150,000. It came in November, and we have 20 days to distribute the money. The money was given in December. The money is given to all teachers that are effective or highly effective. The highly effective teachers get 25% more than effective teachers. So at this time, I ask the board to approve the Muncie Community Schools Teacher Appreciation Grant Policy.
Ms. Phelps, this looks like the similar thing that we've done every year. Is that correct?
Yes, we have to do it every year.
If I may. So the funds that we receive, it's from the state appropriation. They have a separate line item in the state budget that goes for teacher appreciation grant. And so each year, depending on ADM, they calculate for schools and they send those funds out. So these really it's a separate grant from the department that comes directly to Muncie.
Okay. Any questions?
Move approval.
Been moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll show that passed. Ms. Phelps, do we expect that to occur at about the same time period from the department?
Yes. Money goes straight to Brad's office, and he has a formula that he uses in order to calculate the amount of money each teacher receives.
Does any other member of the board wish to be heard before we move to media questions?
I just have something to add. I did not mention Dylan, who does a great job in HR, and our teacher. How long's Mr. Deniston's been here? 2 years?
Okay, we got Isaac.
Gee.
This is his third year. Brad, third year. He's done a fantastic.
So thank you for being part of the hiring team for a teacher like that. So thank you.
Oh, sure.
So I earlier today, during the public comments, there was a question about the video. And I just wanted to comment that we live stream. The last board meeting, we had a sub filling in. Unfortunately, Darren was out for a funeral, I believe. And so, that person had a little bit of struggle getting the video to tape with the live stream. So it was unfortunate that it didn't start quite as quickly, but it was just a simple error for a sub filling in for us.
Okay. Thank you. With that, any media questions? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, those are nice.